So welcome to today's lecture in the Big Data Analytics Summer School at Caltech. My name is Thomas Fuchs. I'm a research technologist at JPL and a visiting scientist at Caltech. And I will speak about decision trees and random forests today. So we'll start by introducing decision trees, how they work, how they are inferred, and how they are tested. Decision trees are then used in one of the next modules as base classifier for random forests. Decision trees are widely used in science and in practice due to their simplicity, their speed, and their applicability to a lot of different problems. So in general, a decision tree is a set of nodes. On the left side, we see a general tree structure. The tree starts at a root node, that's 0 in that case. Then we have intermediate split nodes where decisions are made, and then the tree splits up in sub-partitions, and then at the end we have terminal nodes or leaf nodes. So in practice, you could imagine a very simple example, as you can see on the right. In this scenario, we want to classify images to belong to one of two classes. One is outdoor images, the other one is indoor images. So you can think of asking a set of questions. So the first question could be, is the top part of the image blue? If yes, you could go to the right and then ask the next question, is the bottom part of the image blue? If yes, you would go right. If no, you would go left, and so on until you reach one of these leaf nodes. And the leaf node then indicates if the image is actually an indoor image or an outdoor image. So this is naturally a very simple example. It will fail most of the time, but it should give you an intuition how these procedures work. In medicine, you would, for example, ask questions about gene expression or protein concentration, or any other value you can measure and which is interesting. And the leaf nodes, for example, would indicate if a patient has cancer or not. In space exploration, we would be interested, for example, in surface features on asteroids, and we will talk about that in one of the later modules. So in practice, we represent samples in our dataset with a feature vector. So features or attributes describe objects. So in this case, we have a two-dimensional feature space, and we have two kinds of objects. A positive class with red pluses and a negative class with the green minuses. And they are described by two features, x1 and x2. So these could be, for example, weight and height of persons. These could be two genes. These could be two visual features. This could be two astronomical features describing stars, for example. And what you can see is that the feature space is, in the feature space, the two classes are very mixed. And if you want to now train a classifier to differentiate these two classes, it's not entirely trivial. So in practice, one could think of a linear classifier, so a combination of these features, and try to split the dataset based on some linear combination of x1 and x2, which in this case clearly would not work, regardless where we try to make this decision boundary. So in practice, what we want to do is we want to use a method which can flexibly partition the feature space into subpartitions, where each partition at the end represents a leaf node. So when we learn a decision tree, and I will explain decision tree learning based on what we do for random forests. There are a lot of different techniques how that could be done, but I will talk about the most commonly used one. So in decision tree learning, you would start by looking at all the different axes, the different kinds of feature, and try all possible split nodes, and then choose one of them satisfying some kind of criterion. In this case, that could be the misclassification rate. So you want to find, for example, the vertical split, number one, which best separates the two sets of samples into positive or negative ones. Then in the next step, you would go recursively down the tree and then look only on the left part. So, and after you split with feature 1, and then you would decide what kind of feature, this could be again in our scenario feature 1 or 2, would separate these classes best. So in the case on the left, there is a quite nice separation which optimizes the misclassification rate. On the right side, again, you try to separate the space and come up with a feature. Then this is continued until one of these classes is pure. So in decision tree learning for random forest, we would stop learning if we only have one sample within one of these subclasses or subleaves, or if the partition, all samples in this partition would be from one class, so we would have a pure leaf. In this case, it's partition A, and everything inside would be the negative class. We then can continue that in all subparts until we end up with a completely grown tree, which completely separates the feature space in only pure classes. So you can see at the leaf nodes on the right, some leaves represent the positive class, some represent the negative class. In practice, what you see here is an overfitting example. So we completely overfitted the feature space to nicely separate the classes. In practice, this will lead to excellent training error, but to very poor generalization. And in practice, to overcome that, if one only trains one tree, one would use pruning strategies where you actually limit the depth of these trees to generalize better. Or you could use something like random forests, where all these trees are learned from different kinds of data. So now during testing, we could just go down this tree. Let's see, we now have a model, we get a new sample, let's say a new person with height and weight, or a new biological sample with the expression of 2 genes, that's the yellow star on the left, and we want to classify it for being either red or green. So we would start at the top of this tree and then successively ask all these questions. So the first question would be, is feature 1, which is our x-axis, larger than the thresholded one? Then we go to the right. Then we check the threshold on feature B for split node 3. And we also go to the right. Then we come to number 6, which again checks the feature, there's a split on feature 2, and so on until we end up at a leaf node. And this leaf node, in this case the partition F, is completely green, so that's the negative class, so we would classify the new sample as green in this case. So what you can see here are different properties of a random forest already. So first of all, in practice you would not only have 2 features as in this case, but you would have a whole set of features. So for vision examples, the number of features quite often go into the millions. For DNA microarrays, you would have hundreds of thousands. For some astronomical scenarios, you would have very sophisticated features which go into the hundreds. But the tree would first of all operate in a much more high-dimensional space as in this simple example. But regardless how big the space is, during test time, when we actually go down this tree, we would only check this, in this case, 4 conditions. So it's very fast. It can be implemented enormously fast, and that gives you a huge benefit for real-time applications like autonomous driving for robots or decision-making in medicine. So in the example before, we used split nodes, or also they are also called weak learners, which were decision stumps. So these are axis parallel splits at each split node. But theoretically, we could use any kind of function at these nodes. So we could, for example, use linear combinations of features as seen in the center plot, or as seen on the right plot, we could use, for example, conic cuts to get a more localized estimation of these features. Theoretically, one could actually also use trees, neural networks, or support vector machines at these splits, but that would actually defy the reason to use these trees, and that's this enormous simplicity and transparency of the final model. So another difference which is important for our applications is that what I showed you before was a tree which was learned until you only have poor classes, so every leaf node represents only one class. But nowadays, in most examples, we would not do that, especially if you have millions of samples, like in the image classification tasks. You would not want to train trees which are thousands of levels deep or hundreds of levels deep, but you would like to stop earlier. And then you would have a mixture of samples at each leaf node, and that gives rise to a posterior estimate. So the histograms at every leaf are a proxy for a posterior for the random forest. So if you have, for example, in this case we have 4 different classes, blue, yellow, red, and green, evenly balanced on the right. And then if you go down the tree, in the leaf nodes are not pure, but you would have a dominant class. For example, at the bottom right, you would have red, which is dominating, but you would also have the other classes. That then can be used to actually quantify the uncertainty of the tree. So if all the classes have nearly equal weight, that would indicate that the classifier is quite unsure what's the prominent class. But if you would have, as in this case, a dominating class, you would, with high confidence, classify a new sample as red. Thank you.